Hey, what's up guys? Mikey here. Just got out of college and don't know what to do with your life? You feel like you need a job or a relationship in order to feel happy? Or are you just trying to kill time while the casket sneaks up on you? Same here. So I'm here today to talk about how to talk about things. Because what else would we do? Pay our taxes? Talking about things is both a turn on and a turn off. So here is my 12-step plan to learn how to successfully talk about things. Step 1. Deciding what to talk about. Knowing what to talk about is a big deal. It can really help define who you are. Sometimes you have to think long and hard to decide what to talk about. Sometimes you can just go with what you're passionate about and go from there. There's nothing wrong with sharing your passion with the world, as long as that passion is something humane. Do you really want to be somebody who makes vertically based videos at your own funeral? To provide an example today, I'll talk about my favorite show. It helps because I'll be talking about that at my funeral anyway. Krusty Krab Training video is the episode that functions as a training video for any new hires at the Krusty Krab. Once you've figured out what to talk about, that brings us to step 2. Start talking about the topic of discussion. When starting to talk about what you're going to talk about, you need some kind of prologue before you get into the beef and potatoes of the turkey sandwich. Like Wet Painters, this episode aired on May 10th, 2002, and is the 100th individual episode of the SpongeBob SquarePants series. Something that helps is to create some kind of joke about it. If you think the joke is funny, odds are it's not, and if you can't think of anything unfunny, just pull something out of your ass and that'll work just fine. It's also the episode that features a narrator other than the French narrator almost reveal the Krabby Patty's secret formula.
Okay, the secret formula is...
And it also reveals that Mr. Krabs' first name is Eugene. This episode is one of the most popular SpongeBob episodes of all time and is considered a standout of the season and the show as a whole. Now me on the other hand, often you have to state your opinion and it has to be true. There are 3 different types of opinions. The one where you agree with the majority, the one where you do agree but for different reasons compared to the majority, and then the flat out controversial opinions that'll make people want to hurt you. I always loved this episode as a kid, but I never would have thought it was the absolute best of all time. I can see how it's a standout for sure, but I never would have thought this was the perfect episode, as some others call it. Now this is coming from somebody who always liked every single episode in some way, but while some tastes have changed over time, my opinion on this episode is that it's still awesome, but I'm not sure I'd say it's my favorite. I do have an actual personal favorite, but maybe I need to be convinced to change my mind. So let's watch this episode and see if that can happen. And now we've come to the overanalyzation part of talking about something. I'll go more in depth on this as I continue, but this is the part where you will inevitably lose some listeners by putting on a lecture. So the episode starts up and the title card and opening credits are black and white. The training video starts with freeze frames of the Krusty Krab alongside music stings. The narrator addresses the video for recent hires of the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob, the newest hire, wants to make a Krabby Patty, but he has a lot to learn before he can. The Krusty Krab is highly successful to an extent, but it took a while to get that way because the restaurant does have some backstory. Now something important when talking about things is to act like you're better than whatever you're talking about. In this instance, you have to be satirical and point out any kind of nitpicks in a comical, snarky, and facetious sort of way. Please refer to the following example. From humble beginnings, some may think that Mr. Krabs is always the financial wizard he is, and that's true because he got his quarter back after using it to pay for soda. That's not being a financial wizard, that's being a greedy scam artist. After the war, Mr. Krabs was extremely depressed, but when a retirement home went bankrupt, he turned it into a restaurant and the Krusty Krab was born. It sounds like a lot of hoopla to make over a little Krabby Patty, but it's so true because this guy got hit in the head with a brick. When talking about things, make sure to spice it up either by making stupid noises or changing the visuals in order to keep the listener's attention in some way. The Krusty Krab today. With the demand of customers, Mr. Krabs makes overcomplicated descriptions of a spatula, cash register, ice cubes, straw, and ketchup packets. The Krusty Krab isn't that modern. Oh, thank God. But employees are just as important to keeping the Krusty Krab alive as the technology. Luckily, SpongeBob has the makings of a good employee, but there's always one who's not so good. A bad employee is inattentive and wears a button that says, "I really wish I weren't here right now." There's a name for employees like this, but this one is called Squidward. Training. The narrator teaches SpongeBob the phrase poop, which stands for People Order Our Patties. A customer is about to place an order. The narrator gives us A, B, and C choices, and the customer chooses the C choice. What about D, all of the above? SpongeBob gets excited to make a Krabby Patty, but it's not that time yet. The next topic is personal hygiene. The narrator explains how to make sure you're hygienic for your shift, aka, here's how you wash your hands, dweeb. Don't be afraid to poke fun at yourself from time to time. We are human beings after all. We have flaws. If you try to act like you're perfect in any way whatsoever, get the out of my life. SpongeBob is looking spick and span to start his shift, but Squidward is sleeping in the stall, and the narrator says no employee wants to be a Squidward. Sorry, narrator, but everybody is a Squidward. I know I am. SpongeBob wants to make a Krabby Patty again, but the narrator says there's still more to talk about. The next topic is your workstation. SpongeBob is shown keeping his workspace clean and shows how organized his shit is. Squidward, on the other hand, his workspace is so bad he got head trauma from the cash register drawer. SpongeBob wants to make a Krabby Patty, but the most psychological aspect of the job is the next topic, interfacing with your boss. Really? I thought that was the job itself. Mr. Krabs refuses to give SpongeBob a raise, and the next topic is the customer itself. Patrick comes in and hears the narrator and thinks it's the ceiling talking to him. Squidward tells him to place an order, but Patrick falls asleep trying to think of something. The narrator reminds Squidward not to say rude things to the customer, but even when he asks again, Patrick still can't think of an order, so the narrator cuts away from them to talk about an emergency situation. Sometimes something like awkwardness or stupidity is required for something like this, which already requires no shame. The narrator says that the Krabby Patty can be considered a treasure like gold from Atlantis. Well, Mr. Krabs did technically get rich thanks to the Krabby Patty, so there's that. Then Plankton shows up and starts to escape with the Krabby Patty. SpongeBob starts running around the restaurant screaming, but Mr. Krabs catches up to Plankton because Plankton settled for maximum overdrive and not the turbo. Plankton was launched away, and cutting back to Squidward,
Just remember, poop.
does anybody really want to remember poop? Squidward suggests Patrick order a Krabby Patty, which Patrick agrees, but Squidward asks if it's for Hero to go. But Patrick can't think of an answer, so Squidward gets frustrated again. All the basics of the training have been covered, so the narrator hypes up the Krabby Patty for 30 seconds, and SpongeBob is shown worshipping it. The narrator says now that SpongeBob is ready to learn the most sacred and dark secrets of how to prepare the Krabby Patty. SpongeBob is so excited that part of his head comes loose, but before we learn the secret formula, the training video and the episode ends. Alright, that was the long-winded part. Now it's time for the long-winded part, the actual opinion. The thing that makes things not worth talking about in the first place. Whoops, almost forgot. So that was Krusty Krab Training video, and that is nothing short of an awesome episode. Definitely one of the best of the entire series. So let's talk about how this episode is structured. This one is quite different from what we usually get from SpongeBob episodes, since we normally get an actual story and characters bouncing off of each other in some way.
SpongeBob, what are you doing?
Oh, you know, just hanging around.
Boo!
We do still get that here with something like the Patrick and Squidward banter.
Squidward, your ceiling is talking to me!
Are you gonna order something or just make friends with the paneling?
Sometimes cursing is necessary to make a point, even if you're one of those people that your peers think is too nice to curse. But this episode is a parody of training videos for new hires of Where the F*** Ever, and it goes all out with it. Because of that, there's a lot more creative freedom to do things you wouldn't normally see in a regular episode, like the ending where it ends abruptly while the narrator is mid-sentence. Since this episode doesn't have an actual story or plot, ending it like this works perfectly. And it also helps to keep the Krabby Patty secret formula a f***ing secret. I was surprised the ending went that way when I was a kid, but I also didn't think too much of it at the same time. I just figured it was intentional to keep the formula a secret. I was kinda right, but it's also because of how it's structured, and it's brilliant. I remember one time I watched this when my grandma was in the room, and when she asked what the formula is after the episode ends. I mentioned how it cut off like that so the formula wouldn't be revealed. Dividing sections of the episode to focus on certain topics and having a few rapid-fire shots of the Krusty Krab alongside music stings are other things this episode does that are like training videos. For example, the poop thing only works in an episode like this because we're learning about the basics of the Krusty Krab. Something like this wouldn't work as well if it was in season 1 and Mr. Krabs was teaching SpongeBob about it. And the A and B answers for this question are really funny just for how out of left field they are. Every section of the video has funny scenes sprinkled throughout, like the Hoopla fish and the narrator's outburst.
Wrong!
Mr. Krabs' descriptions of all the modern devices, every time SpongeBob is excited about making a Krabby Patty, pretty much Plankton as a whole, the giraffe on screen, and the list goes on and on. The scene at the end where the narrator does a fanfare for so long is, well, long, but it's something you don't really expect at all, and it's pulled off brilliantly. The title card may all be in black and white, but that's to subvert the expectations. I also like how the narrator isn't the typical French narrator who does the time cards. The narrator is voiced by Steve Cannell, I'm sorry if I butchered that, and this decision makes the episode all the better. I don't think the narration would have the same impact if it was the French narrator doing all the voiceover work throughout the whole training video. Something else that is recommended by doctors is that you do some kind of skit when talking about whatever it is you're talking about. Whether it be an unfunny quip you say during discussion, gathering various like-minded individuals together to act something out, prove a point, or make a threat, or just something that involves some kind of destruction.
I knew I should have gotten the turbo.
I love that part. Even with all that said, we still get some jokes and gags, and all the characters feel just as, if not more, in character as they would be in a typical SpongeBob episode. SpongeBob cleaning his hands so much they're gone altogether, the slapstick humor with Squidward, SpongeBob multiplying himself, everything with Mr. Krabs and Plankton throughout the runtime, whether they're by themselves or together, so on and so forth. Seeing Squidward get this frustrated works whether it's from this episode or not. Speaking of characters, let's go back to the narrator. He is absolutely perfect. In addition to not being voiced by a series regular, he also has amazing dynamics with the on-screen characters, like calling Squidward a bad employee, telling SpongeBob he can't make a Krabby Patty yet despite how well SpongeBob is coming along with his training, Patrick being scared by him, etc. And his comedic timing is also awesome.
Haha!
It's a shame this specific narrator never returned in the future. He honestly fits in perfectly. Even if it was only for one line in a future episode from a flashback or something that does actually require narration in some way, it would be cool if he came back. I do like the French narrator that does the time cards normally, but it would be neat if this narrator did a line at the beginning of the episode and then did the time cards himself. I wouldn't want that as a permanent change, of course, but just for one random episode in a modern season, that'd be neat. I love the visual gags throughout, like SpongeBob's eyes doing 360s, SpongeBob's hygiene, as well as this button, and the sign that hangs off of Squidward's foot before he gets startled. As a kid, I'd say the Hoopla scene was my favorite part. Nowadays, I don't have a favorite part. This whole episode is just that good. This one does so much right throughout. Because it's a unique structure, it can get away with a lot more than a normal episode couldn't, like not having a coherent story or plot. Normally, not having a story or plot is a bad thing, but because this episode is so different, it works perfectly, and I love it for that. This episode truly deserves all the praise it gets. It's nothing short of a classic. I also like that it gives some backstory to the Krusty Krab, reveals Mr. Krabs took part in a war, and actually gives some advice for new hires in real life. In a cheesy way, and I mean that in the best way possible. While I wouldn't say this is my number one favorite episode of all time, I do think this is worthy of being one of the top 5 episodes of Season 3 and in a top 10 episodes list of the whole series. all the hoopla that is made over this episode, it's well deserved. Alright, we've gone over how to do the strong opening, the solid middle, any dumb skits, and the importance of being earnest. Now it's time for the last most important step, the emotionally satisfying ending. Krusty Krab Training video is an amazing episode. The unique structure of this one really makes it stand out among others, and there's also a lot of jokes, gags, and character moments that you would see in a standard episode. If for some reason you haven't seen it yet, it's a must-watch. But who am I kidding? If you've seen it, you exist. If you don't know how to end a discussion of whatever it is you're talking about, then a foolproof method that works for just about anything you can think of is